desperation, transformation, death of the storms. 3/28/2011. It seems a rather difficult task, in many degrees of various rational subjects, to communicate and represent accurately some of the very ideas that are willed inside a particular intelligible subject during certain moments within time. The desire to find a common understanding with the dialectical opposition through a means of communicatively understandable concepts, through speech and language, from the tongue or bodily expression. Can this desire become evident and relatively satisfy the needs of whatever ideas the subject intends to express to an opposition? Sometimes there are peculiar thoughts, deep thoughts, within the spirit of a particular subject that are not deniable or to be expressed negatively. For the peculiar thoughts in reference here transcend any limit of criticism, any limitation of criticism, good or evil. However, these thoughts only depart so far and express adequately within the limited method and means of the subject's will and action to representation. It is a rather sorrowful thing to perceive the state of intelligible ideas becoming seemingly denied, rejected, and vilified, though never to the Creator Lord or to the subject master. For the purpose and reason of most of these negated ideas categorizes the world or universe into a hierarchical spectrum that the opposition, the particular subject speaks onto, however so in question, appears alienated and in a state of distress, for the internal respect, ability, pride, and dignity of the opposition. The intelligible giftedness of it is in truth lacking. It therefore feels insecurely and secretly harbors a negative disposition toward the primary subject, and through tricks and cunning does it inevitably succumb the master. A downfall of supervised labor and work commends. The labor and meditative study that was done upon the part of the opposition, that is, until a remainder of enough belated confidence, power, and self-respect was become acquired, so that no longer did a remorseful sentiment or downcast pitifulness ever again burden or dominate the will of the opposition. March 28, 2011. 4/1/2011. I tell myself to find an appropriate ground within the profoundest abyss of this cosmic realm in order to establish, construct, and develop logically, organically, and correctly the necessary principles, ethics, values, and morality that I feel must again become shared, given thought and enlightened upon whatever individual subject that hereafter can be reached. Although acted upon such intentions, these wishes and hopes, the ideas within the subject are dying, faster and ever further. This very world is vanishing, falling away into dust. A simplistic fatality and morose dissection within peculiar lobotomy of cerebral cortex, radical ventricle defibrillation of forgotten heart valve palpitation, speaking nonsense to perhaps all the world but to the own self. Impossible to care any more. Future contends little hopes towards safety, security, and holy salvation. Becoming darkened, I sit here upon this hopelessly elaborated, designated jewel throne, as my once faithful guardians and praetorian protectants stormed the very barricades within my caesarial palace. I am hereupon beheaded. Nothing remains. I ask myself what is left of this mess. Such hopelessness and desolate depression, a desperate solace. I share condolences for this world. I have nothing more to offer. What happened to this world? Everything thrown into catastrophic waste and infernal chaos. Final order remains now only within this chamber. The time comes when I am next to follow. The tragedy is really happening. This is not a dream. Feelings and thoughts produce actual, sensitive, and lively effects of pleasure and pain. And the only pleasure here lies forever within the memory. I looked back into the shadows of time, recalled everything lasting positively and ideally. It happens in so many cases. I saw this very world in mutual respect with the herd and its innate and a priori cultural leaders. I foreshadowed Greek imagery and pre-Socratic monoliths among the highest and greatest of methodical years, yet not a spirit of time had seen such heavenly gifts for so long. Spoken with truth and honesty, I did not reflect any more. This world gone to waste and disease. Final evacuation and elimination of decompositive late preservative elements. We could not enter once again into the once unique and religious chasm of free and libertine thought. knowledge deep within the corruption and manipulation of every kind of matter. One cannot begin to breathe without at once exhaling and extending the stench of corpses and zeros. We do not need to point out, express, or further direct the world to the primary substances that are designated to waste and siege in an alliance of great summary and incalculable units to protean dust. Death and release from this hell. Conceive of a better life. The only question is for how long ought this change to significantly occur and relieve the microscopic dissonance that painstakingly desires for so greater and better an existence within its very world, however ill-fated and insanely lost in its scruples it may have become. April 1, 2011. 4/11/2011. Everything that is will turns into dust. Reflections into images of a distant, forgotten past. Perceived nothing more ever remains. The body frees itself from chains. No further complexity of what is ineffable. Wisdom comes and goes, creates and destroys. No future existence after death. Everything understood and perceived through various means of symbolism and solipsism. The world reforms itself, reacts accordingly in response to the very spirit and consciousness the subject is in possession of. Sight, sound, touch, and so on. Everything sensible thus performs its procession directly within the will of the very subject, the will that imagines directly within the hands of the Creator, Lord, and God. We wish to know what this Creator, Lord is, who exactly he is, what he might look like, etc. Just for what reason has he set myself and my soul into an objectified form and had myself part ways with him, to fall into manifold phenomenal appearances and distorted phantom dreams within the very hard and determined course of this world? When I ask this question, I feel I know an answer is somewhere to be found. I might find this answer through a deep reflection into the spirit and will of this world, to communicate with the very phenomena that are the direct manifestations of the logic and will of the Creator Lord. Perhaps it is here that the answer to this dream is to be found. The Lord subjects himself to a rigorous routine of trials and tribulation. There is no doubt to this. That as well, the many unfolding experiences of suffering, torment, and misery, when reflected upon honestly and rationally, diametrically outweigh, oppose, and redetermine the trivial amount of happiness, joy, and paradise that can be found within the dream-like, fantastical state of this world. It seems as it should be known that our fellow humanity, due to the relationship and connective application of ourselves with our everyday mundane utilities of experience, pretend to subject ourselves to habit and vice of denial and effacement of the many stark, horrible events that govern and officiate the various rules and laws in accordance with the world and spirit of the Creator God and his very nature represents and is in possession of. The subject of humanity itself, for the most part, as far as concerns the general representation of the West, experiences life in such a state of denial, ever the more so remarkably, than for whatever veritable subject apart from such a place does so in experience. The awakening shock and astonishment of a nihilistical subject, when the will of the Lord unfolds himself, something real and brutal for whatever delusional concealed subject is in action and movement not anyone with a rational or organized mind understands and judges as something profoundly new or not found to be expected. For instance, it appears that the state of this world surrounds itself over time with various capital and material interests, monetary pursuit, carnal pleasures, and gay, trivial chattiness, even when the very profoundest atmosphere and majestic air calls for things otherwise. So much that all the more, the material existence, coupled with the well-crafted appearances of the will of the Creator Lord, transforms itself into a reality, a well-deceptive and dissimulated lie, so that nearly all of the subjects within the scheme of the trap thus proceeds into a slothful laziness and dumbfounded pursuit of greed and lust, envy and wrath, where a relative conception and understanding of justice, virtue, uprightness, and nobility thus begins fading away, where all truth becomes lost even further, and the general representation of the various subjects then consequently frees itself and feeds well into the bottom of such deceptive lies of all appearances. They then sprint aimlessly about in a never-ending scheme, a so-called pursuit of happiness, then take with them the notion that in some far-off land they, in their particular molecular, minuscule, and fleeting lives, might find eventually a supposed end and meet a shameless requisite of a fulfilled and completed dream. Everything within such regard is flawed, logically, and seriously defective. all must become reflected upon and practiced otherwise. For the end result and conclusion of such a particular perspective is a state of a world having no idea how to govern, regulate, or rationalize itself, without any possibility for it ever to have considered and commenced a renewed progression and development of itself into something ever more different, valuable, justifiably greater, and more confidently wholesome than for what it once has been and that now is of its own. With this being said, I wonder really the reason for this particular view of the world takes its place so preeminently, yet manipulatively and inevitably, how such a perspective were ever to become as advanced so far as it has, in so sickened, nefarious, and malignant a state. Why such a depressive and suicidal idea were ever given a concession and granted a power to incessantly grow from the mud and produce its stout and rotten fruit in the existence it once and forever has ultimately had, and independently and freely distancing itself from everything greater, better, more beneficial, and truthful in understanding itself for once and for all. April 11, 2011. For 14/2011. Germination from seed, gestation in a time and then falling from the womb. A slow recollection and remembrance of utter existence. Titanic wealth and situational change. A diminishment of rich progression. Too many things to recall in particular, though generally ethereal. One final recollection of symbolic milestones in their very order and rank. An important conception occurs. The hammer of hell becomes clearer and ever the more realized. Pianistic servitude and subordination of orchestral keys into virtuosity in scientific mathematics, although a passionate value and idealistic love of world remained changing and ever more present. Aristocratic hierarchy and understanding of everything within minute and subtle organizations and references into rationalistic data and logical spectrum. Along with genetical hereditary formation, the individual characteristic thought patterns within the subject became formed, determined, and justified. The passion was brutal, the thoughts radical, severe, color and shade, residue, very subtle positioning of things that were not much without place. Slowly turning onto darker, more individual, deeper, more salvational ideas. Standing apart from the crowd, the world cast eyes upon this very form, followed by a need to do this, the need to establish and found myself in identity from within the very chaos and the misunderstanding principles of time and place within this very world. Rise of the willing subject toward intellect. Temptation to not become lost or forgotten by the masters. Integration and intervention of psychological peers. Stationary substance for time, locked in sterility and fixed in a mode. After conforming to habituation, a return of a thoroughly exalted and powerful feeling youth into a realm of strange, foreign, and likely incomprehensible phenomena atmosphere. Real scholasticism and such, mingling with a few spirits, although they were never close. Forever distant and eccentric, as hard structure and design already beckons this dominion, an introduction of absolute costume and arm, a stiff arm salutation, blackest coat design and corpse-like paint upon the reaper's countenance, outstanding from the world just as I was intended to and needed to, in order for the subject to become preserved in the lasting hall of time. Characteristic response from peers, scorn and fastidious derogation, instigation and contemptuous negation of appearing empiricism, cause eventually to irreparable delusion, as though later on, when the garb was gone and fitted into the most unsuspecting of clothes, the manner of walking and appearance in general, the very same instigators, hateful bullying seekers, continue to lash upon this frame and to drag this soul deep into the mud. This is not right. There needs something fixed, a resolution. After writing endlessly upon the destruction of those fellow pureful subjects, a friend turns my mind onto logical conclusions in order to fix and establish more effectively the very problems and equations needed to be absolved and corrected within my very world. The hammer of hell bangs incessantly upon the anvil during this time. New introduction, presentation of identifiable nationality occurs and shapes the very direction of my desire. Impossibility becomes clear and understandable. Scrapping of the garb that once first-handedly and immediately aided to define my character as it was that I had seen to it in my vision. A return to scholasticism once more. Final sessions commence and then off into higher intellectual, phenomenal, and spiritual adulthood. Meanwhile, commencement of a thorough understanding of darkest yet most intelligible ability to judge the world and rank everything in accordance with the will. A change of scenario. The end of youth draws near. Inside hazy laboratories of young adulthood, remembrance in nostalgic academy, establishment and initial foundation of international presentation, architectural design and artistic rendering, into realms of laborhood and capital acquisition, however petty and novice. Slowly but surely, the very realms turn their observations toward the very presentation and design of darkest youthhood fantasies, as though the delusions were not over and hadn't continued to grow away, progress, or deny. It must be an experience of something so significant and profound as to take much time to get over with and repel from, even if it meant my entire reality already continued to progress further into the halls of time without my being ever ready for such a change. All the while, endless confrontation and familial abuse, making the tragic darkness ever harder to move on from. Animosity draws nearer. Observation becomes conclusive, judgmental, and condemnable. The very fields of environment I stationed within were becoming volatile and impermeable within my very mind. Even so, was the judgment ever occurring? Did the supposed criticism and condemnation actually exist? Though feeling deeply within that it were so, I decided eventually to put forth an effort to understand my entire soul and take this understanding as far as it could go, to for once and always come to a lasting peace with myself. At first, it appeared what needed to be done to be initially changed was the most immediate and closest environment I was stationed within, the source to that of my very darkest youthhood fantasies, the driving force behind the hammer of hell, that of the familial environment. There proceeded thenceforth a singular attack upon the head of the terminal, that is, a destruction and disorganization of property, marksmanship, and then into the very abyss, the world that consisted of only me, some possessions, and my car. Unable to rest anywhere, now homeless, in order to store upon and deny the infernal wilderness, I returned to that very home so many years ago that I had confronted in all of its odious tenacity and visceral perturbation. To this day, I still hold some of the same sentiments that I had felt within me at the time, though now my remembrance of these recurring nightmares has since come to fade. A philosophical confrontation takes place between the head of the terminal and I, at the very place. To be clear, the moment turns for the worse. I recollect and recognize the very impending doom that was coming of my character, the youthhood fantasies of kingship, imperial viceroy, musical triumph, etc., all to crash down and shatter into a million pieces. As the very breakdown commenced on that day had taken place, I knew not much else what to do, and fell into the arms of the enemy, paralyzed in the hardest of tears I ever cried, in one final moment of characteristic humiliation and degradation. Night falls. I slumber upon the hard and merciless ground, awaken and begin search to locate shelter, food, and various necessities. 2 weeks pass, staying at the meantime in a motel. I land a spot fully intertwined with the very cosmos and be fixed within a heavily spiritual atmosphere. There it is, I recommence correspondence. There it is, I recommence correspondence with a familiar character, one countenance so, almost coincidentally, similar to myself at the time, in valuation, morality, intelligible character, and judgments. Much the same subjection had proceeded for a long time, deep into the night. In the meantime, there had been many deeper changes of myself. The formal, near absolute representation I had at the time, the showing and sharing of the very ideas and values I desired to express and stand upon throughout this world, everything was beginning to change and seemed positive for the first time in many years. All this seemingly positive resolution was becoming very complex. Here it was during this time that I began to look forth and listen to the abstraction in my mind ever the more attentively and devotedly. I don't know if the voice I heard would say whatever things it did in my mind as it actually would in reality, though something truly special about this ability really seemed to aid and assist for the loud and obnoxious trouble and suffering that I once was experiencing and enduring prior to this. Finally, upon returning home to that spiritual cottage, after 3 nights in an asylum, a new ability to find restoration and peace of mind, coupled with the ever-present, ongoing troublesomeness of the mind, that this necessitated a fast intervention and hospitalization of recovery into the days of October of 2006. It would appear all hope and recovery of my character, sanity and mind were to have become lost, unfounded, groundless, and disappeared. A philosophical poverty of concepts, images, desires came about. Slowness was acute, force planetary. All notion in reference to the outer world now became clear, that everything simply occurs in the very mind. The mind was a singular manifestation of the Lord's will. Everything outside it were merely the will's reflection and representation of the will's heavenly, hidden, and concealed ideas. For this philosophy was born. I then developed a special need to understand everything that was happening, and indeed everything that had then happened. For both time and history had taken place prominently within my perspective. I possessed then a need to pull myself out of the darkest hole in the ground that I led myself unwillingly into. Nevertheless, despite all the confusion and difficulty of comprehension at the time, it was decided thereupon that I would give credence and affirmative credibility to my reflection from here on, that it was necessary to understand everything, purely and spiritually, and also that I was slowly becoming aware that everything was not as it seemed, that perhaps attaching value to the world, to the universe, was not something important anymore, that looking onward, past the image, past the reflection, was tantamount in importance to bring upon an inevitable deliverance of a self-struggle into restoration and salvation. It is true there were things that became ever the more spiritual at this point in time. Purity of intellect became birthed and conceived. Childishness and youthhood had driven to recede. Value and morality became distant and obscured. It was harder to understand and make sense of things. Nature and unadulteration of land became pleasurable. So much so, it seemed to another subject, I might actually have become naturalized, and every now and then arrived into town from a deep seclusion and isolatory solitude within the deepest and coldest of woods and ice-covered mountains. Musical skill and productivity still remained, although I hardly ever returned to the piano as much as I had used to. It appeared to others around me that I was lost, that truly lost were the very fibers and nerves of my mind, that I was never going to come back, never to return to the same subject I once used to be. Here it was during this time that perhaps a single love instance occurred, where I felt close to and especially regarded a woman for the first time in seemingly ages. The friendship we had together was always questionable. It seems over time that nothing closer in intimacy was ever going to take place. Coupled with this, and the seemingly total loss of direction and ambition that had taken place several months back, whereupon this loss of direction necessitated in the dropping out of and closing application of both college, academia, and labor environments, what happened gradually was a transformation of soul into a particularly unique character that came to be around March of 2007. It was during this peculiar time that the first observations I had of myself were directed toward reclusion, isolation, hermeticism, and misanthropy. A castle at the blackest of midnight, descending the castle tower stairway, garbed in a black robe and carrying a torch, donning the inverted cross all the while dressed in the paint of a corpse, baroque pipe organ interludes sounding in the background. These were some of the desires within me that were made known and immediately perceptible to the reflections of my very world. The love interest of mine ended sadly, and it appeared during this time that my reputation as a pure hero, a warrior, was coming to be finished, that I was then branded the pseudonymous moniker of creep or stalker. It is to this day that I still feel the disastrous, damaging effect of being marked as such, or being present to a herd of people that might imagine my character as consisting of such a kind of thing, though never was I truly to be. Monetary issues were always present during this time. I had first violently resituated myself apart from Hierner's house half a year back, found a place to stay with rent, yet slowly but surely it was beginning to crumble apart my very reality and sanity, so that an inevitable displacement from the college and work environment had taken place, while I remained still at that very ethereal house, present there on the confirmation condition that I'd credit them with some monthly money. During this time, after scouring myself into virtual reclusion, any possibility of returning to the workforce to earn myself a stable source of money appeared as a dream, that I truly delved into the inner confines of my will's consciousness. In essence, I truly thus escaped from the outer reality, the unchangeable, drastically unmanageable forces of matter, became kind of an outcast that the world did literally never see, or never would see, so long as I were to remain in that state. Here I devoured voraciously into writing, presenting short paragraphs of random thoughts for the world to see, doing so from the means of that very presentation website that I was in possession of at the time. The public reception of such was marginal, and hardly ever noticed. I thus grew more and more serious, monstrous. My ego and desire to affirm myself grew ever more radically. That eventually the ever-pressing monetary issues that were going on from the time had inevitably caught up with me in my current position. That the reality of homelessness and forced street life came into being for the first time ever in my life. Fortunately, and rather fatedly, my landlord contacted Turner, the person whom I had felt all this time truly assisted in creating this incorrigible mess that my decrepit state of mind had come to. So surely I knew, or at most thought, that I wouldn't return to his location once again. As well, any other place to go to was out of the question, for I possessed hardly any contacts now that some time had gone by. I was out of work for months, while at the same time had been spending money on bills, purchasing necessities and such, one thing after another to keep a roof over my head. I had been out of college. My social life had appeared gone and irreparable. But sure enough, I communicated to Hurner for the first time during this episode, sitting down together with him and the landlord, discussing and strategizing on what to do with my situation. Here it was that penultimately he accepted me back home, so long as I kept a job, or at least would pursue forth one. Here during this time there was a kind of salvational grace ever present. A regression from maturity did occur from what I remember. It was during December 2007. Thereupon I thoroughly and deeply realized the egoistic state my character in its world it had fallen into. Therefore I then began systematically embracing any or all notion to myself, becoming vaguer and more obscure than I already was. Although this seemed all for a positive purpose. January 2008 took place. I went on a cold weather camping trip with my friend. It was a good experience. This was with the one friend I spoke of earlier that represented so many similar relations and interests to my character. In February of 2008, I fell into a matching confrontation with Hurner, probably for the last time a serious one that all but mattered, so that I packed my belongings and drove out into the streets, intentionally becoming homeless this time. Though Hurner somehow found me at a bookstore the same night, he took me to a restaurant, we talked things over, and again we apologized and redeemed ourselves, ready to move on and live once more with each other, this time in a more peaceful and ever-understanding state and condition. March of 2008 saw to the first time a greater instance of writing ideas in absolute tragic form. These writings, as with nearly all others, remain and are seen simply by looking for them in the catalogue of my work. Time passed, I lost contact with several meaningful individuals. By May of 2008, behold, surely enough I came into contact for the second or third time with my middle school friend Idun. The vast details, legacy, and story that took place between her and I, accounting for nearly 3 years in time, will likely be written upon in an article elsewhere, though to summarize, the two of us quickly became reconnected and comparative with ourselves during that month of May, and, and soon months were going by, and were at first rather happy and almost truly understanding of each other. And it was certainly during August or September 2008 that our relationship maintained its height, when we were truly happy. Basically, most everything in my life that took place after our initial get-together in May coincided with the presence and reality of being with Idun. Certainly her presence was special, and she was a preeminent and immediate figure in my life for some years to come. We met up together virtually every day during the latter half of 2008 and the beginning of 2009. We spent a dozen or so hours together during each of these very days. We stayed home for most of the time, played the piano, read together, went out and bought food from various restaurants, dined at some good places. She worked on her homework while we'd lay around the room at her home. Most of the time spent together took place at her place. I really thought it was difficult prolongedly for a time to introduce her to Hurner, though this eventually took place. We'd every now and then visit each other at my home, that is, if Hurner were away, or if we simply weren't permitted to visit her at her place for whatever reason. We'd go to various lakes around town, go on hikes. In truth, we enrolled in classes together during the spring semester 2009, a philosophy of religion course, likewise initially a psychology course. I tried my best to endure the strangeness and difficulty of sitting in such a classroom for the first time in years, with a multitude of subjective people. All the while, it was during this year, the year prior, 2009-2008, that I fell into experiencing an acute and very troublesome medical condition known as blepharospasm, where the sight of the subject's eyes are disrupted by an ever-present reality of blinking, second after second, so much so that most of the time my eyes were for long stretches closed, so as to rest them from the pain of the ever-succeeding spasms, although I was later cured of this condition by changing a medical prescription. Anyhow, during March of 2009, Eden and I went out on a week's trip to Lake Tahoe in California. Much of the events of this overall good trip were written about already during the following month that we had returned. However, it was during April of 2009 that the relationship Eden and I did take a mortal hit, and we never recovered from there on. Her mother discovered some correspondence between the two of us that occurred while we were separately online. The conversation was argumentative and troublesome to read. Her mother barred us for some time from visiting each other at her place. It became ever more doubtful if we were the right ones for each other, as our visits seeing each other were now becoming ever more diminished. That seeing each other during this month marked the first time we did not visit each other all day, every day, since more or less the very beginning of our relationship, starting nearly a year before. Things developed during this relationship that made the presence of her among me worse than I imagined. Inevitably, jealousy and Puritan morality, standing in opposition to her experience, decided the direction of the relationship. It was after various arguments that the notion of breaking up forever was to become more imminent. Eventually, we officially broke up during August of 2009. That the both of us maintained that we'd continue to correspond with each other, at least during the time, as the best of friends. We both agreed upon the breakup. We both were saddened about this, knowing it was for the best, that in another life we would have been more compatible, that doing this spared ourselves from any further malediction or verbal abuse, which honestly I had come to act upon her almost regularly, just prior to the breakup. September of 2009 then comes. I had by this time moved into a cabin in the mountains that I had discovered during the prior month, and here became incredibly isolated all of a sudden. It was very lonely. Eden and I during this time had mixed feelings of love for each other, though after these feelings were completely gone, we felt it better to remain as good friends. Time went by. During October of 2009, I was without a piano and barely writing anything artistic during these events, though I maintained a journal of particularly trivial things I had experienced during the days I'd spent up there at the cabin. It snowed up there a few times during that winter. My car became stuck in a nearby dirt road with all the snow. Freeing it onto an asphalt road was next to impossible. I needed to call a tow truck during this time to lift it out of the near ditch it had fallen into, suffering some body damage, a flat tire, etc. Made it out on the road. The tow man filled the tire with air. In the following day, I walked out to my car to find the tires in just a healthy condition as before the incident. Here it was during this time Eden became more distant from me. November 2009, both of us were tucked in during twilight at the cabin. A most horrendous and abominable nightmare had taken place, seemingly satanic in its grimness, one that truly decided the fate of our souls and departed ourselves from each other in intimacy forever further. We remained in contact over the next month, ever more sparingly. She appeared to be very busy with things, school, work, and such, and on the new year of 2010, the two of us were together at the cabin for what would inevitably be the last time, where a bleeding red string was cut, cursed with white magic spells after ritual the two of us had acted upon and taken place in order to protect the sanctity and goodness of ourselves in the location. It was found lying on the floor of the living room of the cabin, from where I recognized later and understood it symbolically as the very representation denoting a separation and cut ties association between the two of us, that of which would never be repaired. Time flowed, things that happened during the following months. It was then, during February of 2010, that the loneliness and bleak, depressive solitude of living at the cabin up there all the time, alone with no one to talk to, that I coordinated with Hirner and landlord a strategy to resituate back at Hirner's place, which inevitably took place during February of 2010, as I have stated. Nearly everything that happened posterior to that month in time could truly be considered life-defining and originative, although it is hardly noticeable and vaguely transparent, but certainly a maturity and depth of thought, progression, and creativity had taken place over this time. All the philosophical works, concepts and thoughts that I would labor on, meditate so prolongedly and eminently in the past, were beginning to flow with much ease. It was during this time that I was truly matured and implemented a true and thorough understanding, wisdom of philosophy, reasoning to give it wholeheartedly to whatever subject is freely open enough to listen in upon. The communication between Idun and I during this time dwindled to the point of near extinction. It was this very last month, during March 2011, that surely our final correspondence had taken its place. In any event, the majority of the writings that I did during this past year contained some of my keenest or closest insights into the ever-pressing symbolism and reality of this existence, the solitary nature of man, the solipsistic ideality of any subject's will and reflection, vagueness and obscurity, philosophical execution and conciseness, clarity and wisdom, denial of will, nothing but intellect, knowledge of emptiness. All the things I wrote upon during this past year are preserved and can here become perceived by whosoever wills himself to reach upon. April 14, 2011. (5/31/2011). In the end of time, fluctuation of thought, paganical disgrace, malignant spore symptom, severe carnage, effortless rupture, resolved to absolutely inoculate epidemic excelsior, de aphrodisia, inner non-cathartic rancorous, bubonic plagiarical, Lutheran, anti-priest distaste, interest, seamlessness, contralto alteric procession, remembrance of rush inside, radical coming of essence, return to earth, enter into further manifold scaffolds, lightning strikes the eye, it burns, verily so, in accordance, pure action, ethical holy performance, kept locked away in predation from the creator mind. Evil holocaust burns within, a communion of souls fall apart, flames abound in riddance of the Holy Spirit and chaste exercise in annals of Trappist mercurial monk asceticism. Once repentant, present visions of very mysterious mystical eyes. Watch higher, the bell toll rings from the clock tower, the steepled summit of Presbyterian invalidity. Disinterest of causality, return back into dimensions of formlessness. Around the universe, the solar star orbit abides, derides, everything external as reflection from within. The spirit of man objectified, made manifest in the form, against the will of the form. Now apart from dust, relinquish free these frost-ridden badlands, worlds of planetary course, fixed in a line, yet not for long. Here becomes present, a comprehension of man becomes clear. Time falls, concepts cease, forgotten tomes of generous science and art release. Western adoption of vague mysteries, accidents, antiquity, moments of great worth, reign no more. Grow deeper, roots of the soil, harder to pull, stronger to gain. In a dark corner of the medicinal laboratory, a lost, sad, tragic spirit begs for alms among the empirical, multifaceted, empty sensations. Honesty, clarity, reality covered in a mask of hollow lies and verbose fallibility. Stars abound, somewhere within far-reaching ends of the spiritual edge. No more to do, nowhere to run. Discovery, order, and rank within the very decadent abyss. From one to all, adhere nothing before thee, nothing beside thee. Time flows. Patiently await thy renewed becoming. May 31, 2011. 6/1/2011. Recently I underwent a short discussion with someone with a Christian religious inclination, and then left the conversation feeling that my statements had made hardly any impression on that other subject. In fact, the more I reflected upon these things, the more I realized how almost always this was the case, in such occasions as this, discussing religious ideas with Christian Protestant persons, and intending to make an impression, or at least to create an agreeable understanding with the other persons, how this almost never was the case. Thus I decided afterward and went ahead to reflect upon this as much as I could in regard to establish and found common principles and an understanding between Christian doctrines, if there are any, and that of philosophical inquiry, toward whatever intellectual subject there may happen to be. Therefore, after a night spent in reflection, I then came to better insights, a better recognition of all the things I was formerly being so rampantly and frequently dismissed of by the Christian. The first, most primary principle that I believe must be set up and established in the world of philosophy and religion is that of the idea that morality itself springs from two very different elements, bases in reality. In fact, pretty much from day one are the two inseparably inclined into a state of becoming. To be clear, what I refer to is that of the morality of man, germinating from the purely archetypal state, within a state of prehistoric nature. Thus I refer also to the morality of woman, generating from as well the pure archetypal state within prehistoric nature, though it seems that when reflecting upon feminine morality in particular, that it is something suppressed and hushed, for good, for the opposing condition, that it was suppressed and hushed, in general at least, in the matter of the state, if there be any, communal right and association, social presentation, etc. But I must explain, the masculine morality represents fire. Among the four classical elements, it represents courage, solitary, solidified stature, honesty, clarity, reality, etc. In essence, doing something to the fullest, without expiring the effort and succumbing to a need to deliver himself or to be saved, not to be helped along the way to the end, by an upper, higher, more powerful hand, as in the Creator or Jesus Christ. Feminine morality, because of the given nature of the species of woman, naturally comes to represent pretension, cunning, craft, dissimulation, philosophical incomprehension, unwavering subjectivity, etc. At least these traits listed represent the glaring effects and essence of the feminine nature, as there are admitted in feminine morality certain positive traits within, although these at the last appear to the acquirer as something only temporary, bound to the present, without a release or abolition from space, and as noted from time. It would appear necessary to the philosophical inquirer that he eventually give up the pursuit and acquisition of the feminine moralist altogether, for everlasting happiness within the given lifetime and span, as promised frequently by the feminist, is not something to be found within the confines and threshold of phenomenal reality. Now to turn to the matter at hand that I already wished to express, now that it is established somewhat to the reader of the two states of morality, that it is something fundamental and inescapable in reality, so long as no attempt is made to do so, but it must also be refined. As earlier we have spoken of the moralities in a prehistoric state of nature, that now if we are to watch and observe a succession of the world through the concept of time, we come eventually to states of countries such as Sumer, Egypt, China, India, etc. More implicitly do we intend the reference to the state of Roma, as it was during the early days of empire. In fact, we shall come back to this subject matter shortly, as there is an importance and significance in addressing certain more prior issues at hand, having to do with establishing specific principles within the philosophical Christian realm of inquiry. First, to start off, in the vast scheme and world of reality, there comes a pressing need eventually to establish certain concepts in persons, in their general dispositions, their ideas and representations in themselves, etc. By this I refer to that of the real disposition, also that of the ideal disposition. The concept of disposition may not cover most completely what currently is in our minds. The concept of archetype or ectype, etc., may cover adequately its performance. It must be understood that with essence the real archetype within a person or state of mind, etc., the characteristics represented in this form express certain traits that should not be shunned by those otherwise in an ideal state, but rather they should make up and compose themselves within the vast degrees and shades of the universal integral hierarchy. This being something likewise to establish into a state of understanding. The realist is practical within his archetypal characteristic behavior and states. So long as it falls along within the line of real disposition, he is fundamentally expressed by his disposition of the state and condition of meaninglessness. That meaninglessness I describe more fully as a state of carelessness, disinterest in things. We shall arrive onto what these things are soon assuredly, that ultimately at bottom, especially if the character of this realist person represents his actions so much within a common and typical state, that his character is then something general, universal, and predictable in regard to its realism, then ultimately our inquirers inevitably come to pass judgment on his character as something constituted of a nihilist. There seems to be three classes of nihilists, three forms of nihilism, that these are of the oppressed, which belongs to the first class of nihilism, that of the deceptive or masked, which belong to the second class, and that of the average or medium, which belong to the vast class of the third. This third class is combinative with that of the second. Now, with the nihilist, it must be written that his only value or will to mean anything in an intelligible thing is that of the meaninglessness and nihilistic tendency toward his will, ideas and representations in themselves. So, in essence, the practical, pragmatic, real tendencies or potential toward applying an expression in his life, if they be so, generate a sense just what just that of what is being described. To look at this in another angle, jumping to the modern day and age in our inquiry, as it shall be temporarily permitted, a photograph that represents the realist in his character and condition is one of disinterest, carelessness toward higher goals, aims, where the only meaning in his substance is being forced by the subject as meaninglessness itself. Ultimately, nihilism overwhelms the very stance, structure, design, and aesthetics of the picture near completely. Now, as it becomes increasingly difficult to describe what the realist and nihilist is, without containing some adequate and valid oppositional substance to apprehend, it is here to be written that just what we are establishing in principles as the realist, now on the other hand we are to have met with and recognized with force and essence, that of which is the state and condition of the idealist. Whereas more or less generally the realist is categorized in that of the practical and pragmatic places of nihilism within the various three classes of nihilism that we have thus defined, masked and oppressed, etc., the vast multitude of the average. It is thus to be noticed that the idealist is thus conceived into a state with much rarity, that is, in the numerical quantity or abundance of its kind, that where we had once written when describing the masculine morality, it is noted that here with the idealist, the characteristics or virtues of the subject are that of those once described: honesty, clarity, integrity, solidity, etc. The idealist is a genius, one uncommon to all, yet in his pursuits and its spirit strives to represent in truth the commonness to this all. The idealist is contrasted by the realist in that he is artistic, genuine in his representations, whenever or whatever so it may be. The idealist contains meaning in his essence, the truth that of which he gives to himself out of an otherwise meaningless reality. Thus he does not want that, for he is in pursuit of a divine nature of godliness, and thus tends to progress and succeed thoroughly through the chain and causality of human evolution. The idealist, so long as he remains ideal, represents masculine morality, or the morality of man, as birthed and conceived from whatever prehistoric state of nature, from the west or the east, the south or the north. The realist, as must be figured by now, represents the feminine nature of morality. So long as the morality is feminine, the elements of the four classicals represents water, carelessness, nihilism, etc. Love also, however, the idea of just what this love is will be soon discussed. As we return to Roma now, it must be noticed that Roma itself had thus become to represent almost a divine state in that of the masculine side of the Hegelian dialectic. In sparing the details of the life inside such a civilization, for doing this would denote an example of materialism, and more importantly that of realism, we turn our attention to the symbolic state and nature of the condition of the world, and that with enough reflection gained from our resources, we ultimately come to agree with ourselves that the Roman Empire in its early state constituted ideas such as near perfection, totality, absolution, commandment, godliness, masterliness. The list is well enough to classify an understanding of just what the state in time had represented. We notice the word listed masterliness, and take it with us to understand that this Roma represented, so far as time has allowed and given us experience, the very masculine moralistic state, of which we had gone to describe and taken labors to establish earlier in this discussion. The master state morality of this Roma was also that of a totally ideal state of Roma, as the two go hand in hand. It was so much this kind of condition for some time, and so ultimately refined in its potential and actualized, that a brewing below in the lower ranks, below the ideals of the state, began as naturally a direct and also indirect effect of the state of Roma in what culminated in the myth and legend of the Christ, thus subsequently created what was then to follow. I make every insinuation to suggest that the influence of Christianity had performed more or less greatly in the decline and fall of the Roman Empire in the West, as Gibbon masterfully had elaborated upon and expounded within his magnum opus. But as we return our attention to the fall of Roma, it must be noticed here that the uprising and unrest within the ranks of the lower classes, the ones influenced by and influencing Christianity as it was coming to be known, represented those very dispositions and characteristics of realism and nihilism as being refined. Here is when we ought to make our observation on love, Christian love, that is, that such a thing as it was influencing the deteriorating Roman Empire represented the very slave ethics to love just what is not gifted, not abnormally or rarely intelligent, not noble or refined or absolute, not capable of skill or skilled enough to complete the assignment and duty to the state, office, or administration, in whatever trial or tribulation the responsibility so decrees. As well, the concept of Christian hope as no more than a representation of the will to survive in a state where the subject's slave ethics and feminine morality could thus remain preserved. Now, tracing our thoughts From the very beginning of our discussion, it would appear by now that I have finally arrived to the position where enough knowledge and preliminary remarks have been made in a single discussion to finally unravel the certain thoughts and positive ideas that I have spent thinking about the past nights, in response to a prior discussion with someone with a Christian religious influence, and upon noticing the continual dismissal, negation, or lack of agreement comprehension with Christian subjects, so that a set of these theses or principles ought to become established and grounded, in order to continually create an influence and impression upon those subjects that do not profess to care, take interest, or solemnly avow themselves into a harsher, solitary, more natural and meritorious state, within nature or wherever else. These principles will be continued in further discussions. The first idea that should be mentioned is that free will is indeed inherited upon birth, as the Christian mind posits frequently for the existence of free will, although here we make the counter-discovery that with age and experience does the spirit that is of free will, the life force, eventually expire and turn more toward the behavior of necessity and determination later in the subject's life, so that it is thus compromised that free will and determinism both exist, are objectified, act accordingly in the subject's life, and have validity. Also, objectivity and ideals are represented by the master subject, the one that remains true to art, aims higher than himself, wills to further progress the upright path of human evolution through means of concepts. It is with these concepts, expressing higher ideals, that turns the subjective into objective in this regard, that the passions thus remain empty of sensation, of pleasure and pain. For in the expression of the ideals, there are more or less nearly all times fairness and justice that must manifest accordingly. As these notions, fairness, justice, nobility, are a part of the masculine subject's virtues, the need to acquire God's mercy of love does not apply to everyone. There are uncommon persons that exist where supernatural assistance, aid, and benevolent prayer, answers and miracles, etc. are overly sufficient, that it would not be necessary to actualize it, that the means to acquire what is necessary and good in life is possible and full enough of potential to do and complete by an independent and solitary subject. The notion of free will represents youth, lack of age, and maturity. Ideas full of sprightliness, silliness, and lack of knowledge and wisdom. Thus, with enough time, the masculine subject eventually casts off his will to firm freedom, thus denies it, becoming a determinist with an old, ancient, and wise state of countenance. Another thing, the Christian plays philosophically stupid to the philosophical inquirer, probably by nature, but more than likely by choice, as the general concepts used on the one hand by the philosopher are entirely neglected and left to dust by the Christian. The Christian thus opens a book into vague and mysterious discussion, grounded and rooted in principles and concepts that are not ordinarily found, defined, and understood by the philosopher, thus generally stumping him and leaving him more or less refuted, without leaving a good mark of impression and influence toward the Christian. With the Christian, butterflies and such are an ideal image in nature, things that do not know any better. Also, the consistent notion of becoming delivered and saved from the phenomenal, realistic state of the world, for he feels inadequate, inferior, and likely unable to carry out the tasks and duties, as has been mentioned above, in order to sufficiently please or terminate the contract with the administrator or official within the state of civilization or sovereign government, etc. The ideal transcends conventional morality, reason, or purpose. The aim for it is meaning itself, giving this so out of an otherwise probably meaningless existence. We do not want to or desire to become reminded of our sufferable, empty reality. For if no progress or advancements in the sciences, arts, states, etc. were made, our human matter would eventually be reduced to that of the ape, which to us is simply backwards and a laughing disgrace. We prefer to exercise our mental and intellectual faculties to the fullest, to continue the progression and evolution of an upright and transcendent world of nature. A mundane presentation of things is not enough within life, within the world, within the social milieu. The master idealist takes his creation as far as it inevitably may go, with enough license of time. In the end, judging from those prior experiences, it is probably best to terminate intellectual association and debating with the typical Christian, the one that is of the various three classes of nihilist. For generally speaking, he does not look into philosophy with a mind-over-heart approach for cures. His philosophical vocabulary of grounded, definite, and established concepts is marginal at best, and most frequently is speaking from the direct source of his passions, which, uncontrolled or not dominated, is not a virtue of idealism by far, speaking from what he selfishly and partially feels, not from what is judged symmetrically, impartial, fair, and balanced, with the will to true love and pure honesty of the master idealist's existence. Also, we should make notes to observe and to beware of the technique commonly used by the Christian to overlap and designate that both sides of the dialectic the method of grouping both the idealist master and the realist slave, generally from the lower ranks of Roma, into one good side, as though all the subjects within the world were mediocre, none beyond the generalization and act stereotyping all of the natural world, the poor and dirty, the rich and refined, etc., as the same. Integrity in aristocratic numerological hierarchy is key. The presence and begging of a subject for acceptance and an affirmation of himself as a subjective inferior is troublesome for the master moralist, for the potential to cause animosity, war, and hatred is constantly to be aligned. The solution is normally to give in, to surrender to the slave moralist. Great tragedy gets its spirit from this situation. The slave moralist's goal is just the reverse of the master's. The nihilist's aim and goal is to represent or express the return from a state and condition of meaning, value, and priority founded by the master, to that of a state and condition of meaninglessness, lack of value in intellect, lack of anything rational, upright, intellectual at all, but the hopeful and sympathetic faith in himself to be delivered and freed from the Creator's chains of sin, creation, and troublesome hierarchy, things the master moralist otherwise indeed loves to express and represent. June 1, 2011. Six 2011. Extreme music, or death metal, black, thrash, etc., seems an example of what nihilism ultimately leads to. Its presence must be a shock, astonishment, surprise, reminder of what nihilistic symptoms and behavior in a decadent state of life ultimately represent. Something to shun, fear, lead away from, to return to a rational, ordered, meaningful state for individual mankind. It is a radical method. June 2, 2011. 6/12/2011. Time. A subject appears, manifests, and objectifies. He acquires consciousness and awareness, though not enough to recall the very beginning of his manifestation. As a particular subject, it is evident immediately of, in observation and perception with his eyes, ears, and flesh, an external world full of phenomena, thus understood correctly as reflection for the subject. Time appears in succession. Space is abundant and preeminently constructed, full of empirical objects of sensation for imagination and abstraction. Things appear bright or devoid of light, sounds soft or harsh, the hands things solid or fluid, hot or cold, and such. Wherefore objects give agreeable sensation to the subject, is called pleasant, whereas disagreeable is called painful, etc. The subject is naturally disposed to acquiring pleasant sensation, departing from the bad. The subject is born with a character. He thus subsequently refines and adapts through the course of his time in his world, given the circumstances that unfolds within his experience, whatever decision or liberty the subject takes in order to continue to achieve his aims through the good, pleasant state and condition that he naturally is disposed to represent. So much for the subject's character is naturally ascertained. For minerals, plants, and animals, minerals as devoid of consciousness, though infused with will, as is everything within the subject's world. Plants devoid of perception, though infused with consciousness. Animals devoid of reason and transcendental reflection, though infused with perception. As for humanity, and what the subject experiences in relation to this concept, for the subject, the manifestation of this phenomenon eventually becomes rather important, spiritually significant. The subject seems naturally disposed, for it is in his nature to desire recognition, experience, and socialization with whatever other familiar subject within the external world. Now that the subject is disposed to will, as it is too in his nature, he desires to experience ultimately with others social subjects some things well, good, or pleasant, more or less. His will seems to feel something more or less complete, to depart from the natural, solitary, lonely, and desperate state of his condition. That the world within the subject's realm imparted is rather not full, infinite, or boundless, but rather limited. The world thus feels the becoming burden of its condition. The subject thereto remembers his suffering, where then these moments spur into action the subject's actual denial of this condition. That circumstances in the world of the subject are not fluid, rapid, or easily changed in order to suit the needs, desires, or will of the subject. Thus it affords to him the incessant difficulty in order to transcend from his limited condition and to annihilate, or erase, feelings of boredom and monotony, or of desires for something or objects which the subject does not or cannot have, the way of the will which unfortunately becomes grounded with certainty in his consciousness in the world's reflection. In short, it would rather be a great deed to continually erase or deny those vain feelings, giving birth to longing, As for, during times of boredom, to create or apprehend something constructive or ideal, some piece of art that quiets the will from its natural suffering, and affords for the subject a refreshment from the cosmos. Because of the natural state of the subject's existence in the lifetime of his, that will and desire play a significant role for the subject, it is not unusual that his experience brings before him cases of human behavior in action that represent this typical suffering, that this particular reflective subject from the external world is bound and determined mistakenly in wrath, or bitterness, or envy, or of things insensible to the pleasantness naturally desired by whatever subject in a good state. Thus, as this reflective subject comes before him, he creates nothing for him but things such as miscommunication, negativity, and social deconstruction. It seems rather wise for the personal subject to appeal towards some things such as self-control, willingness to understand, and to create it so on the part of the opposition, to quiet the will as again a desirable force. In essence, he assimilates this case into a repository of cases that generally gives the meaning of the same nature. It becomes important for the subject to develop the virtues that give toward his world and for himself that sense of pleasantness and goodness that inevitably proceed to aspire himself toward greater and nobler things. June 12, 2011. 6/13/2011. Acquisition of a golden key. To the lock, release the forgotten seal. Awe in countenance. Direction of the gaze to vertical effulgence. A hall, gleaming of heaven. Shout, utterance. Will and commandment of pain and torment. Effigies of the forgotten maze. Pleasure supposes negation. Wander through the walls of life spent eternally in pain. Must there lay open some path to glory? Holy salvation from enslaved traps of existential reality. Noise pulsates in the brain, coming from ineffable distance. Sights of brilliance, full of brightness, yet attracts all sorts of evil lies, selfish destroyers, and devilish thieves. In flesh and touch there seems no perpetual comfort, perpetual fleetingness of the very sensation. Life beckons déjà vu, a memory and knowledge antecedent from the particular subject, slow, gradual recollection of everything since performed. The denial of a tabula rasa, motivation in action toward transcendence from concrete reality. Rather, it be a very complicated scheme, determined by the word from the will of the Holy Creator, one wholly removed from the pit, from the gladiatorial arena. Objects in the progression of concepts, signifying with reflection the multitudinous movement and living existence of the macrocosmic soul spirit. Mankind is subject to this absolute experience one at a time in separate though parallel realms. Questions abound eventually. What is the purpose for the subject? Ultimately, one finds a harsh answer to everything deep or intelligible. It is likely the subject is objectified into his material world for no other purpose than to atone positively for an act or deed that had been committed unfortunately while within the dimension of the Lordship Creator. Or the purpose is possibly not one at all, wherein the Lord simply sends his subject into the world for a pleasant, playful, or joyful purpose, regardless of whatever suffering or misery the subject is likely to experience. The subject more or less perceives a cyclical state of nature. Thus, when upon the theory's application to the external world, he comprehends metempsychosis, or reformation of the self, when upon death of his particular soul. As for this, when upon death of a particular subject, it is likely, if the soul does not obtain its salvation its time around, that it either frees itself physically from the deceased form, wanders to the material world in a phantom-like state, and seeks and enters into the seed of a man, whereupon it weaves and determines itself once more, its life essence into that of the father's subject, that when upon insemination into the womb of a woman, it there creates for him a new consciousness that of course grows with the material form of the embryo, fetus, and thus newborn child. Or it could possibly be that upon the death of a particular subject, the soul manifested in a specific realm of many parallel realms of the universe, thus immediately commences and instantly begins itself in the womb of a woman, without seeking upon the same realm of the world in the state of a phantom spirit, nor for man's seed to locally infuse itself into. Time and space seem always changing, though from the Creator's absolute perspective, whereas all temporal succession and spatial position are apprehended by him in a complete and comprehensive form, so that in the wisest of perspectives everything and everyone would confess to being static and determinate. It is nonetheless understandable that, for at least the knowledge of man, the notion of time and space always appear to be changing, But because of this supposedly fluctuating action, it thus comes to mind that the notion of free will has its plausibility and application to the subject's reality. It comes to our attention that the will of the universe utilizes its representations in the way of a machine. A systematic scheme is elaborately imposed upon every object that the subject has its occasion to sense and to perceive. Ultimately, to understand, judge, and to know that the world of the subject is set up like a jack-in-the-box spring contraption. It is assumable that all causality and action in the subject's world acts itself accordingly to that contraption's effect. Everything in the external world is essentially determinate. However, where the notion of freedom of the will makes its case, it appears all the more this notion serves the blandishment of a lie, of falsity, that is, so far as anything or everything material and non-spiritual make their work into being. This lie also goes for ordinary typical conceptions and abstractions of the mind, things thought of in the internal spectrum of the subject's will, that however now are only going so far as the thought is still bearing resemblance and connection to the subject's sense in his outer will. Now, wherefore the notion of free will rests within a state and condition of truth and validity would be that where the sensations of the subjects cease to be, the perception is clear, free from any particular motive, whether external or internal, where the understanding apprehends more or less enough spirit and soul, or rather enough denial of the will, of denial of physical sensation, and where the will of the subject's soul and spirit is quiet enough that the stuff of the world's matter is blanketed and veiled, darkened from the subject's occurring enlightenment, that it is this process and state that explains and demonstrates the condition known for a subject as a particular freedom of the will. If no effort, compassion, or understanding is made in order to achieve one of the various degrees of the state, that bodily concerns are relatively still tied in, associated and connected with the will toward freedom, etc., the spiritual condition is not fully achieved, and thus cannot be considered fully as one. An example of a false freedom of the will condition is that of the stereotypical reflection of hope for the masses, wherein that hope, where generally and deeply enough considered and concluded, represents within its uncovering and unmasking nothing more than the preserving of the base desires and material will of the sheep, the herd, and the mass multitude of slave realists. The hope that this particular subject imposes suggests its logical status simultaneously the notion of free will, and therefore the certain hopeful reflection creates for the personal subject the sense of state of dichotomy, irrelative association, insufferable insanity. And to separate this irrational confusion and understanding the intention of it in its purity would be a virtuous, though more or less difficult act. In any event, the subject of the world that the Lord Creator sets his subject into is, as was said earlier, consistent of what appears to be a ceaseless and incessant fluctuation of time and space, creating the illusory notion for the subject, that of a moving and transitioning world, wherefore the Creator apprehends time and space, suggestion, succession and position, causality, etc., all at once, and everything in his creative universe is manifest and known before him, plausibly static and determinate to him. However, the notion of free will, as it is correctly apprehended by the particular subject, thus delivers himself into a veritably abolished and freed state for the supposed fluctuation. It elevates him into a high and a priori state of transcendence and spiritual understanding, removing himself from the fleetingness and illusionary forces and troubles of the subject's mind, whether it be of abstraction or external sensation. It is this will to not will, in fact, that serves to destroy the very culminating pains, inevitable idleness, and posterior disappointments that undoubtedly create for themselves in the subject's mind, if he is not caring enough to labor himself to transcend. Art is a good means for this, though as it goes for aesthetics, only pieces of music, portraits or paintings, sculptures or architectural monuments that serve to deny for the subject those very trappings of the will in its own determinateness and slavery, thus justify nobly their purpose. Now, as the subject enters into a created world, a scheme already wound up, predetermined and known ultimately by the will of the Creator, like a jack-in-the-box contraption, does everything for the subject's particular beginning to its end spring into effect, like clockwork, and thus ultimately the subject's only true source, escape and freedom from that schematic trapping, involves the very isolation from and escape from those realms and actions of the universal will, done so by spiritual knowledge, aid and assistance by means of art, or by anything in general that affords for the subject a means to escape that scheme, one that the Creator sends the subject into, likely for means to punish him because of wrong deeds or acts committed premeditatedly in the hall of heaven. The subject is thus guided eventually to atone for his wrong deeds, escape from and deny his punishment, By breaking free from the clutches of his evil material world, thus ultimately with enough sublation and knowledge accumulated in the subject's intellect, with enough acts of mercy and kindness to other men, demonstrating in his world his example of maturity and wisdom, with enough karmatic debt essentially paid off, there seems for the subject that after much time succeeds in his birth and conception to multiple human forms, for his efforts alone in one life were not enough, that he is to destroy or annihilate the very phenomenal form that he was anticipating going to be sent into, thus obtain that very lasting freedom, and therewith possibly ascend back into, by progressive degree, the golden hall of the Creator, or be whatever the idea it may. The subject is no longer pluralized or conditioned into objective matter, but thereafter unified and idealized into an immortal eternity. June 13, 2011. 6/28, 2011. Do not forget lower voices with the higher human melody, not as always tremolos, arpeggios in one hand alone. Continuous or at least thorough musical thoughts. No excessive notation, chromaticism. No lasting optimism in the phrases. Resolute cadences in minor are an ideal, though not absolute. Truth within the relations in hidden Platonic ideas. Apprehending these through a kind of religious Last Supper mysticism. January 27, 2011. I thought about and applied all these musical theories to my recording today at the college. The result of the piece proved for me to be one of the most compassionate and redemptive, honest and heartfelt works I've ever done thus far, I think. I've just been inspired by so many new things, ideas I can't put use into. I can put use into. This Last Supper mysticism is truly only the beginning of a great work to come. Enjoy it. January 28, 2011. Thinking about going to college today to record some music, keeping all these musical theories in mind again. We'll see how it goes this time. January 31, 2011. Great. The day is done and I've assembled together an additional recording, Softer Thoughts, Dying Love, while at the college, with more emphasis on beauty, love, and compassion, rather than the crazy, fast, random, atonal stuff I've been doing with time. A noble return to beauty and well-deliberate melody. It is a shorter piece, albeit long still in contrast with other recordings. Enjoy the piece. January 31, 2011. The mercy I have for Hirner deepens with every time I see him. In the state of spiritual lethargy and exhaustion he is in, I only wish for him any happiness he's deserved for such a seemingly endless amount of time. I truly love you, Hirner. This wish is from Odin. February 1, 2011. Going to settle down and watch some Iron Chef Japan soon. So entertaining of a show, I think. And Fukui-san, with all the flamolas, man alives, throw that man a towel, etc. You truly become hilarious over time, and are a nice tribute to the show. February 3, 2011. Into the practice rooms, ready for some recording. February 4, 2011. Recorded a piece today at the college. Rest, Mercy, Redemption. Came back with which, in my opinion, contains some of the best music, melodies, and ideas I've done so far lately, after a few days of becoming truly comfortable with the piano. The piece must represent the crowning achievement of my works just past. Listen! February 4, 2011. Went to the emergency room today, concerned about a physically aching pain in my heart, fearing a bad heart or bad health. The doctors fortunately told me I'm rather young to typically worry about such a thing. They gave me some medicine and say I should do just fine to come. Such a thing I do rest by faith within. February 15, 2011. Have obtained an interview for tomorrow with a journalist from the Telescope at Palmer College newspaper. The subject is in regard to my piano playing and life's relation with it. Should go well. It's exciting as an idea. Who knows, more exposure may come from this. Feeling rather deeply indebted. February 16, 2011. I've just come home. The interview went wonderfully. I was well spoken throughout. She was really nice and thoughtful. We covered a whole range of topics having to do with me. Music, philosophy, religion, life in general. We just wait now until publication and distribution of the paper, sometime beginning with this March. Great happiness indeed. February 17, 2011. Recorded and assembled together some philosophical recitation videos stemming from older writings I've done. Pretty well pleased with the results of today. A new photograph has been taken too. February 18, 2011. Spent some time updating and elaborating the YouTube account I have, overcoming the shyness I had of friend requesting people. I should now come into contact with an abundance of users sooner or later, spreading more the notion of the public existence of my profile. Anyway, I'm going to keep working on this over time. February 20, 2011. Into the library, ready for another session of philosophical, spiritual, and poetic studying. February 22, 2011. Open the opportunity to a thorough, objective, and comprehensive study once again to the completion of Schopenhauer's principal books. Likewise, beginning with just the same direction, a renewed study of Mein Kampf, an ongoing study of Greek drama and tragedy, Aeschylus and Sophocles, likewise Shakespeare. The ideas are abundant indeed. February 22, 2011. Into the library. Time for some restoration, peace of mind for the chaos of this world and this existence. February 25, 2011. The world can be so strange at times. The heavens work in mysterious ways, and God arranges his ideas for the subjects and sometimes their very insightful aims. I thoroughly believe in the possibility of an a priori love, regardless if two subjects are never to experience each other again or so much as even learn their names. Today, a truly inspiring moment. February 25, 2011. Some photos of me near a grand piano were taken today by one of the journalists at the college newspaper. It went well, now just basically waiting for the article to be published and distributed. Looking forward to it. March 1, 2011. Recorded some music at the college today. Arrival of Pure Understanding. This piece here, in my humblest opinion, represents some of the most confident and securest playing that I've done in quite some time. Honestly, I'm rather happy with the results. There's more room to improve, however, and that I will do. But now off to watch some music videos and learn from various aspiring musicians at their pianos. March 3, 2011. Late night writing I thought I'd like to share. 3/5/2011. It is amazing what mysterious symbolism and strange universal ideas can be revealed when thinking deeply and writing on a general philosophical topic. The result gives the power of knowledge a whole new light and meaning for the subject. March 5, 2011. The frequent evident proofs of an unregulated, unstoppable humanism, slave drowns the master, should be one of the first most significant modes and methods of thought to be altered and corrected if the existence of every character, personality, race, sex, intellect, and so on is guaranteed the chance to live, breed, and be secured in the pursuits of his very spirit, be whatever it may. March 6, 2011. Was entranced rather deeply while playing Final Fantasy VII early today. Took the energy with me to the college and recorded this piece, Meditation. It is not the best by far, but casts a deeper aura, representing the sentiments I was experiencing from the various perceptions I thus recognized. Anyway, enjoy this. March 8, 2011. Final Fantasy VII turned me on to the behavior of gazing at works of art, that is, the background renderings of that particular game, concentrating on them, imagining the various pictures as though the time were going for hours on end. A unique nostalgia from childhood awakens. It is all the more purposeful that the game itself was born during that unique and memorable time. Serves truly as an inspiration. March 9, 2011. Exposed to a great abundance of philosophical, poetic, religious literature, written by the hands of the greatest thinkers throughout history, setting forth an authentic study of the knowledge and wisdom of these great subjects, I could only continue my labors so much within this short span of my lifetime thus given. I feel deeply grateful being granted the chance to proceed with such participation. March 11, 2011. Well, great. The college newspaper article I did with the journalist a few weeks ago has just been published and distributed to the college. I picked up a couple copies, read it, went to the website to receive the full story, and am now rather pleased at its turnout. I posted the full article to my blog for people to read it. It's here as a link. Enjoy it. March 14, 2011. Just picked up some mapo tofu from a surprisingly pretty authentic Chinese restaurant here in town. I'd become curious to try it after watching Chan Kenichi make this dish on Iron Chef some nights ago. Now I'm curious to try all sorts of cultural dishes. I think if I had the money for it, I'd become a gourmet. March 16, 2011. Some of the dishes they make on Iron Chef are so tempting to try. I don't know who watches that show. I'm probably alone in the dark on this one. I'm glad the dish I tried today was good, and one that I could afford. A swallow's nest dish, shark fin, foie gras or caviar dish, although frequent on the show, is something out of bounds financially for now, though I continue to wish one day to try one of these. March 16, 2011. I enjoy the Iron Chef Japan show over the American one by far. There are so many merits to it. I think it triumphs the American version, plus the general atmosphere and unintended humor of the whole thing adds so much to its benefit. I'm pretty sure Iron Chef Japan is not on American television anymore, but all the episodes are accessible on YouTube currently. I've been doing that for quite some time, learning from the show and enjoying it all. March 17, 2011. Probably the most listenable and agreeable piece that I've done in a while, Deed of Compassion. The melody is ever present, and the harmonies are creative. I definitely think this is one of my better pieces. It is long and epic in scope. It certainly does not dwell in shallowness or triviality, so it must be enjoyed and understood with a deep and reflective mind. But enough, enjoy this. March 17, 2011. Why must I become hateful of my world so much, at least of the epoch and place that I am stationed within? Better yet, what reason do I have not to become hateful of my reflection, when this very thing stands in a sinister and cunning opposition to my every value, moral, and judgment, simply for the very reason that my reflection necessitates opposition itself? What a sadistic and cyclical trap this Lord commands. April 1, 2011. Some philosophical poetical venting. 4/1/2011. It was a remarkable and challenging day today. The messenger to Loki is home again. It was hot here. I reflected further on the idea that I may be a jerk sometimes, though ultimately I feel everything in my life for now is settling down gently and rightly. April 2, 2011. I don't even know if my world is critical of me anymore, nor if my world ever was from the beginning. Could the very fear and sensitivity within me have taken me to such a level as I have become? Where would I be without that ambiguous force supposedly concocted from my outer world? Would I still be the musician I once was, having pursued an abundant path within that direction? I feel mute on this. April 5, 2011. I know that a small handful of people were or are still critical of my way of thinking, though these people remain significant to me, for they might represent faces of truth in their ideas. Therefore, I concern myself with them in order to learn and better develop my philosophy and will to judgment. There's no deception in this, and I certainly do not fool myself, for the opposition is probably right, and I have much to afford myself to study from and gain from their wisdom, as otherwise I would remain unrefined and progress less without their assistance and presence, albeit condemnable or friendly. I take this way overboard because it is inevitable and necessary to, if I am to gain the ultimate value of my very existence. The musician I am today is needless and shameless to say a great level, and for fooling myself with the hints and secrets of this world, I penultimately now have much to share, to give and deposit to anyone worth giving. The people I care about and listen to are not stupid either. I possess various principles and values that guide my character from falling into irrationality, misconduct, and stupidity. The world is my representation. It will. And if this is jumping into a pit of fire, then I inevitably experience this very fortune. This is something I desire never to take its place. April 5, 2011. Some writing here, 4/11/2011. I feel deep within I possess still an abundance of positive ideas to share. Any inspiration and motivation to act on this spirit is divine. So thus commences a feasting of a beast, the nutrition of live and healthy elements. For the love of wisdom. April 11, 2011. Convolution, twistedness, asymmetrical injustice, etc. These are precisely some of the things I distance myself from and ultimately dominate. For exactly the opposite, that is the intellect's purity and nobility, etc., are the very things and ideas that I strive to represent to myself, to rightfully possess and inherit. There's no denying that the human mind is limited. Rather, this is a smaller world than you may think, so that everything that becomes willed upon and apprehended into the intellect within the very moment of the subject's time existence represents all that there is to know, conceive of, or to have faith in. If the subject wills intelligibly and purely, with whatever degree that may be, throughout whatever given successions in time, the subject acts upon his fate wisely and rightly. Wisdom becomes limitless and infinite. I don't really care if I appear arrogant to my world. The general representation and character of this world I am stationed within for my lifetime is truly arrogant and condescending of me and of my kind. I'd rather stifle the animosity, inevitably erase and correct the very debris and obstructions to my existence, look and ascend to greater things and ideas, and ultimately become a greater and healthier person. April 12, 2011. Feeling so amazed right now at the discovery of volume after volume of scholarly work while at the library today. Ancient modern authors, Plutarch, Virgil, Homer, Aristotle, British empiricism, German idealism, romantic literature, Goethe, Melville, Shakespeare, religious texts, all existed before me. I wish for the preservation of this library, to devote myself to comprehensive study of it all. April 12, 2011. I wrote this piece, 4/14/2011, after feeling more down to earth, actually as a part of a direct result from some conversations earlier, feeling shocked into reality more, becoming further understanding of the world around me and such, which for a long time, probably due to a large lack of response to my writings for whatever subjects, had seen to my sentiments becoming distorted, my reality ever more isolated, falsified, extracted and solitary, delusional in essence. So I think it is certainly for the better to receive criticism of any kind from any subject in order to knock me back into the world of truthfulness, humanity, reality, and freedom. April 16, 2011. I haven't been up to much these days, nothing much very physically active that is, though for the past few months I've made it a responsibility to study books from the past, at the library and such, authors from antiquity, idealist philosophy and empiricism, though the latter school I feel within falls out of my line of thinking, but I lend an ear to understanding regardless. April 20, 2011. I've come to observe that my will and intellect seems to behold a constant flux, one that varies in degree and changes in levels of power in accordance with fate and circumstantial time. My mind right now, to be honest, feels very clear, strong, and inspired. During this time, I think it would be wise to commit to some constructive activity, record and document the pleasant state it has fortunately come to be in. May 2, 2011. I find that I tend to go back and return to past writings and musical recordings when I feel that I've been out of the cycle of inspiration and motivation for some amount of time. It's as though doing this restores an amount of magic or mana into my intellect that it helps re-begin a rise of sharper and keener abstractions, thoughts, and positive utterances. The observation you make seems a healthy habit to follow. The observation you make seems a healthy habit to follow. May 3, 2011. Traveling is something I feel destined to do sooner or later. Traveling across the country should leave me feeling rewarded and wholesome. To start off small, more specifically, I will likely make a trip to Nevada tomorrow and take it into the sights of Las Vegas and Hoover Dam. Sometime later a trip up north is necessary, Alaska being a pinnacle, lest not I forget upcoming plane trips across the globe. Feeling excited. May 4, 2011. I have a change in mind now as for my trip I'm starting today. Instead of Nevada, I'll be going well past that on the I-15 and plan to make it to Great Falls, Montana within a couple of days. I'll check for roadside inns before nightfall, eat at random places along the way. I'm taking a rental car. I hope indeed to gain much joy and experience from this entire journey. Now on to the road. May 5, 2011. I just got back now and I'm so tired. Unfortunately, I cut the road trip short this time due to my increasingly low budget. I understand that I wasn't as ready for such an epic journey up to Montana as I thought I was, only this time at least. I made sure to eat modestly, but gas right now was really expensive, and the whole renting a car thing I did wasn't working out lucratively as I thought it would with my financial situation. So I made it as far as Las Vegas and stayed there for the night at the Stratosphere Hotel, which was a pretty good stay. I love the desert. Now that I think about it and have seen more of it, Nevada has a good rustic, archaic atmosphere to it. It's quite a change from the climate and aura of Southern California, though not so much, but still noticeable. A camera was brought with me and videos were made with me driving around the city, on the way there and back, etc. I'm going to upload them onto the YouTube account later this evening. Fortunately, no videos were made during the nights while there. All the bright lights of Vegas are quite a spectacle, though all videos were from the day. But it was still a fun and interesting experience. All in all, I'm going to continue to travel around the country and such, some time to come. The journey I did this past 2 days certainly will not be my last. May 6, 2011. Produced some of the random videos I managed to put together during my road trip to Nevada from today and yesterday. Doing this trip was quite an experience. Next time I'll be even more prepared and have even more money saved so the journey will last longer and be more fully rewarding. May 6, 2011. Sometimes it seems after a terrible struggle has ended, a subject is left feeling so rewarded in his triumph that he is justified not only because of the hardships thus endured, but possibly by heartfelt change in the Lord's temperament and compassion in regard to his subject's will and creation. Today, sudden feelings of victorious joy. May 10, 2011. Abolishment, freedom, and disinterestedness in the will and the subject's reflection. A slow and gradual subtraction of chromatic debt. Let rest be until point of subjective extinction, soon to come annihilation in nirvana. Do as you will, think as you may, I will not say nay. May 10, 2011. I've basically been enjoying the pleasure of uploading all kinds of past music recordings I've done onto the YouTube account tonight. Piano demos from 2006 up until mid-2010. Music from the Sorcerer Band is included too. This whole project will be complete and up on the accounts for all and any of my friends on here to see soon. Enjoy whatever like it. May 14, 2011. The second part of a 3-day project completed today. I worked on finishing uploading onto the YouTube account all these past music recordings I've been meaning to reestablish to the public since the MySpace era. Everything looks good. I should be finished by tomorrow. Have a look and see what I've got so far. May 15, 2011. The aforementioned video project I've been working on these past few days, uploading past music recordings onto YouTube, is now complete for the most part, with the account now totaling 150 videos. Nearly all of the most relevant and fundamental pieces are on the YouTube account. http://www.youtube.com/user/Norse Given an appropriate title, image, and description. Anyway, enjoy what may. May 15, 2011. Sitting quiet in the darkness, reflecting upon a past mistake or misfortune that comes to mind, once causing grievance and suffering to the heart, I caress softly the wounds to my spirit, gradually witness the sorrow lifting away through the ever-changing channel of time. I feel better, rested, more at peace. May 22, 2011. I feel more remorseful and sympathetic for myself because of myself with every passing day. Specific deeds acted upon in wrath and ordinary understanding now enormously transform my character closer to benevolent states of human spirits as the heavens gradually welcome repentant souls into their abode. The deeds are redeemed. Time passes for the soul's salvation. God becomes ever more real. May 27, 2011. The beginning of this piece, Colosseum's Prosperity, holds such a rare tragic atmosphere. I think the music is hilarious at first, but soon the true essence of reflective human failure, doom, and inevitability sets in. The sounds nearly beg to bring the listener to tears. Rest in peace, likewise to the sufferer of this creation. June 10, 2011. Rather ordered and organized writing I did here tonight, 6/12/2011. Though I cut it short simply because I felt my thoughts were becoming lost and unestablished. I thought it to be unfair, it would do damage if I were to continue it, so that the writing was not as long or thorough as I intended it, but is still good as it is, I think. I'll write more later. June 12, 2011. A better writing worked on tonight, 6/13/2011. I was feeling sharper, more aware this time. Many of my general philosophical religious ideas were discussed here elaborately. Definitely going to learn and write more. June 13, 2011. Feeling changes coming within, maturation and progression, reorganization of values, easy mastering of ideas, laborious studies, yielding eventually the skilled sovereign state I'm striven for. Transcendent from bitter destruction, characteristic delusion, and gradual mortality of my very world. Commence, heed the procession. June 14, 2011. Becoming excited, anticipating the summer session beginning at the college, with the opening of its music practice rooms once again. I might take a course there sometime, but for now I'd rather plan to create some music recordings for the piano, film some improvisation. It's the first for me. I feel rather positive and confident about all of this. Bring forth the day already. June 17, 2011. A rather silly but fun day spent at the Barona Casino around here with the messenger to Loki. We both left with less cash than what we came with. The two of us bonded a bit. The floor was filled with a lot of people, very smoky, but overall a fun time spent together. We'll probably go again sometime soon. A good memory today. June 19, 2011. Off to the college, going to practice some piano, warming up for tomorrow, where I intend to record an improv piece, likely filming one this time. June 20, 2011. Gave my heart and soul to these pieces to get today. Gleaming Eye. And there's 3 of them. I'm pretty satisfied with the results as well. The repertoire consists mostly of silly, crazy songs this time. I'll approach things differently next time though. I think filming improvs might be a new thing for me. June 21, 2011. Bach is actually one of the composers I go to more often than the others. He, Beethoven, and various romantics are ideal and significant composers for me. I've got a few pieces in mind that I could do. With some time, I should have a Bach piece ready to film. June 21, 2011. I've known for some time that I should increase my repertoire of written music. Mostly these days I practice a few select pieces and 2 or 3 full transcriptions of Wagner operas. But that's about it though. I've wanted to purchase more music of classical composers, also to increase my range of 20th century atonal compositions, as I know the music I improvise owes so much to those influences. Also want to find some role-playing game sheet music, song transcriptions from Final Fantasy games and such, and record those. It should come time enough again when I set to recording some written music for whoever. Maybe sometime next week I'll get a Bach well-tempered clavier fugue put together. Should be a good experience. June 21, 2011. Put together a video combining film scenes from Shakespeare's Hamlet along with one of the most beautiful moments in all of music. That is, I think, from Wagner's Parsifal. Tragedy and reminiscence. This video I offer as an example of pure tragedy, how humanism can affect the heart, essentially getting it to feel once again. Truly, after a long sequence of cold logic or calculable thought. Anyway, enjoy this. June 23, 2011. It seems every time a subject is born into the world, he learns more, acquires more knowledge and wisdom to make use for himself in the next generation, changing, altering the course of his routine possibility, soon in order to achieve succession, restoration, and salvation, essentially finishing off the conception of his course. We are to be inevitably saved, whether a lifetime from now or many more to come. In June 26, 2011, there's a tendency within that when upon an act of artistic, intelligible expression, a particular subject will usually represent a thing striven for, idealized, valued, to attain, for such a thing is otherwise not manifest in the subject, it is left wanting. When I look into myself, I see a question of power. To balance and facilitate this question properly. In reality, I am naturally certain. In art, I tend to idealize beauty and purity. I desire to find this other half in order to create a better state for myself. A quick thought. June 28, 2011.